Macy couldn't shake the pit in her stomach as she fiddled with the silk bow on Evan's meticulously wrapped gift. She had planned this surprise party for weeks, coordinating with his friends and family to make it extra special for his 40th birthday. But as she stood in their living room, surrounded by colorful decorations and the mouth-watering aroma of his favorite lasagna, a nagging sense of unease clouded her excitement. Her phone buzzed, momentarily shifting her focus. Macy glanced at the screen and felt her heart plummet. It was a suggestive text from Evan, but not intended for her. The message was laden with intimate implications, referencing inside jokes and pet names that only someone extremely close to him would understand. Macy's hands trembled as she opened the attachment, an image that shattered her world into pieces. It was a photo of her sister, Tilda, scantily clad and sprawled across a bed that looked suspiciously familiar. The knot in Macy's stomach tightened as the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. The doorbell rang, jolting her from her trance. She took a deep, shaky breath and schooled her features into a calm mask, determined not to let the roiling storm of emotions show. As guests began trickling in, Macy plastered on a radiant smile, welcoming each arrival with warm embraces and polite small talk. When Evan finally arrived, arm in arm with Tilda, Macy felt her composure cracking. The audacity of their brazen display was like a slap in the face, mocking her trust and commitment. As the room filled with well-wishers and laughter echoed around them, Macy's grip tightened around her phone, the damning evidence burning a hole in her pocket. Clearing her throat, she calmly requested everyone's attention, her voice betraying none of the turmoil raging within. With a saccharine smile directed at her sister and fiancé, she announced, "I have a little surprise for the birthday boy." Pulling out her phone, she shared the incriminating image on the large screen, letting the shock and horror ripple through the stunned crowd. Tilda's face drained of color, while Evan's expression morphed into one of panic. Macy's smile hardened as she met their horrified gazes. "Surprise," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "The party's over." After the disastrous party, I found myself on Leah's doorstep, a solitary duffel bag clutched in my trembling hands. She ushered me inside without a word, wrapping her arms around me as the floodgates burst open. For what felt like an eternity, I sobbed uncontrollably, the weight of Evan and Tilda's betrayal crushing me from the inside out. Once the initial storm had passed, Leah guided me to her cozy living room and handed me a steaming mug of chamomile tea. "Start from the beginning," she said gently, her expression a mix of concern and barely concealed fury. I recounted the nauseating details, from the suggestive text to the damning photo evidence. With each word, Leah's jaw tightened, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the armrests of her chair. When I finished, she let out a low whistle, shaking her head in disbelief. "Those lying, cheating scumbags," she hissed, her voice laced with venom. "Macy, I'm so sorry you had to go through this, but you can bet your ass I'm not going to let them get away with it." A newfound determination flickered in her eyes, and she leaned forward, her expression hardening. "We're going to take them down, piece by piece. I'll handle the legal side, dividing assets, getting your fair share of everything you're owed. But I need you to stay strong and focused. This is war, and we're not backing down until they're left with nothing but the ashes of their deceit." I nodded, a fire igniting within me, fueled by the white-hot rage that simmered just beneath the surface. For the first time since the devastating revelation, I felt a sense of purpose, a resolve to make them pay for their betrayal. Over the next few days, Leah became my rock, guiding me through the intricate legal proceedings with the precision of a seasoned surgeon. We pored over financial statements, asset lists, and legal documents, meticulously untangling the web of lies and deception that Evan had woven. "He's been skimming off the top for years," Leah snarled, jabbing a perfectly manicured nail at a suspicious line item. "We're going to bleed him dry, every last penny." Her vehemence both terrified and emboldened me. With each small victory, a frozen bank account, a seized property, I felt a sense of vindication, a sliver of the pain and anguish they had inflicted upon me being repaid in kind. But it wasn't enough. As the dust settled on the legal battlefield, a hunger for true, soul-shattering vengeance burned within me. Tilda and Evan had not only betrayed my trust, but trampled on the sacred bonds of family and love. For that, they would pay a price far steeper than mere material possessions. I knew then that this was just the beginning, the opening salvo in a war that would leave no prisoners. With Leah's unwavering support and my newfound thirst for retribution, I vowed to systematically dismantle every aspect of their lives until they were left with nothing but the bitter ashes of their sins. Returning to work after the earth-shattering revelation was one of the hardest things I've ever done. My once unshakable focus had crumbled, and even the simplest tasks left me mentally drained. Marketing campaigns that would normally excite me felt like insurmountable obstacles, the words and numbers swimming before my eyes in a jumbled mess. It didn't take long for my boss, Anton, to notice the shift. One afternoon, he summoned me to his office, his brow creased with concern. "Macy, you haven't seemed like yourself lately," he began, leaning back in his leather chair. "Is everything all right?" I considered brushing it off with a half-truth, but something in Anton's sincere gaze compelled me to open up. Haltingly, I recounted the sordid tale of Evan and Tilda's betrayal, my voice wavering as I relived the gut-wrenching moment of discovery. To his credit, Anton didn't interrupt or offer platitudes. He simply listened, his expression morphing from concern to outright fury as the story unfolded. When I finished, he slammed his fist on the desk, making me jump. "Those snakes," he spat, his eyes blazing. "Macy, I'm so sorry you had to go through that, but I promise you we're going to make them pay." I blinked, taken aback by the vehemence in his words. Anton was normally the picture of professionalism, but in that moment, his mask had slipped, revealing a burning desire for vengeance that mirrored my own. "What did you have in mind?" I asked cautiously, equal parts intrigued and apprehensive. A wolfish grin spread across his face. "Your lying, cheating sister fancies herself an interior designer, doesn't she? Well, let's see how far those delusions of grandeur take her when we start systematically dismantling her fledgling business." A plan began to take shape, fueled by my marketing expertise and Anton's ruthless ambition. We would strike surgically, exploiting every weakness and vulnerability in Tilda's budding empire, until it crumbled to dust around her. The first strike came in the form of a carefully orchestrated smear campaign, amplified by subtle whispers and strategic leaks. Suddenly, Tilda's once glowing reputation was tarnished, her designs branded as derivative and uninspired. Potential clients began to drift away, their interest waning, as the relentless tide of negative publicity washed over her. But we didn't stop there. Anton leveraged his vast network of industry contacts, ensuring that every door Tilda approached was slammed firmly in her face. Design shows, exhibitions, and showcases all became impenetrable fortresses, denying her the exposure she so desperately craved. Through it all, Tilda remained oblivious to the mastermind behind her downfall, her desperate attempts to salvage her dreams met with stony silence or vague excuses. Each small victory filled me with a twisted sense of satisfaction, a balm for the gaping wound her betrayal had carved into my soul. Yet even as her business prospects dwindled, a part of me knew this was merely the opening salvo. True vengeance would require a more lasting, soul-crushing blow. One that would leave her and Evan not only professionally ruined, but emotionally and psychologically devastated. As I watched Tilda's world crumble around her, a cold determination settled over me. This was just the beginning. They would pay for their sins, and by the time I was done, they would beg for mercy they would never receive. As Tilda's fledgling design business crumbled around her, a new opportunity for vengeance presented itself. Through my industry connections, I learned she had applied to showcase her work at the city's premier interior design exhibition, a make-or-break moment for her flailing career. I could sense Anton's anticipation as I relayed the news. A wolfish grin spread across his face, and he rubbed his hands together eagerly. "Perfect. This is our chance to deliver a knockout blow," he declared, his eyes glinting with malice. "We need to make sure her application gets denied, and in the most humiliating way possible." Our plan was simple, yet devastating. Anton would leverage his influence on the exhibition selection committee, subtly poisoning the well against Tilda's submission. Whispers of her unprofessionalism and lack of vision would spread like wildfire, tainting her already tarnished reputation beyond repair. As the committee deliberated, I watched from the shadows, a silent puppet master pulling the strings. With each passing day, the odds of Tilda's acceptance dwindled, until finally the inevitable rejection letter arrived. I could practically taste her anguish as I imagined her tearing open that fateful envelope. Her dreams of redemption and validation crushed in an instant. A twisted sense of satisfaction washed over me, a small repayment for the pain she had inflicted. But Tilda wasn't the only one in my crosshairs. Evan, the lying, cheating snake who had so callously betrayed my trust, was next on my list. Leah had been meticulously combing through his financial records, and what she uncovered was a tangled web of deceit and illegal activities. Tax evasion, unlicensed business practices, shady real estate deals. Evan had his fingers in every shady pie imaginable. Armed with this damning evidence, Leah unleashed a legal firestorm, filing complaints and whistleblower reports with every regulatory body imaginable. Suddenly, Evan found himself under intense scrutiny, his once thriving empire crumbling as investigations and audits rained down upon him. "This is just the beginning," Leah snarled, her voice dripping with venom. "By the time we're done, he'll be lucky if he can afford a cardboard box to live in." As Evan's world imploded, I watched from the sidelines, savoring every moment of his downfall. The once charming, successful businessman was now a pariah, his name mud in the industry he had once dominated. Yet, even as their professional lives lay in ruins, a part of me knew the true satisfaction would come from striking at the heart of their personal lives, the very bonds of love and trust they had so callously violated. With Tilda's career in tatters and Evan's finances bleeding out, the stage was set for the final act of my revenge. A grand, public unveiling of their betrayal, where they would be forced to confront the consequences of their actions before the very people they had sought to impress. As I plotted the details of this grand finale, a cold, calculating determination settled over me. They would pay for their sins, and by the time I was done, the mere mention of their names would be met with scorn and derision. Vengeance was no longer just desire. It was an all-consuming obsession. And I wouldn't rest until they had been utterly and completely destroyed. As Tilda and Evan's professional lives lay in ruins, a new opportunity for vengeance presented itself in the form of a high-profile industry event. It was the perfect stage to deliver the final, crushing blow to their reputations and expose their sins to the world. "This is it," Anton declared, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. "The moment we've been waiting for." The plan was deceptively simple. Leak damning information about Evan's shady business dealings to key influencers and media figures attending the event. With their guard down and eager for juicy gossip, the seeds of his downfall would spread like wildfire throughout the industry. I nodded, a cold determination settling over me. This was the endgame, the culmination of months of meticulous planning and execution. Once the truth about Evan's misdeeds was out in the open, there would be no turning back. The night of the event, I slipped into the lavish ballroom like a phantom, blending seamlessly into the crowd of well-heeled attendees. My eyes scanned the room, searching for my targets, the key players whose whispered words could bring down an empire. As I circulated, I subtly planted the seeds of doubt and suspicion, carefully curating the narrative that would unravel Evan's web of lies. A hushed aside here, a conspiratorial wink there, each interaction building upon the last until the rumors took on a life of their own. "Did you hear about Evan's shady tax practices?" one influencer murmured to another, her perfectly coiffed eyebrows arched in mock surprise. "That's nothing," the other scoffed. "I heard he's been running unlicensed construction projects for years, pocketing the profits and cutting every corner imaginable." With each retelling, the rumors grew more salacious, more damning, until they reached a fever pitch. Suddenly, every conversation seemed to revolve around Evan's misdeeds, his name a punchline on the lips of those he had once sought to impress. As the night wore on, I watched from the shadows, a silent puppet master pulling the strings of Evan's demise. Each incriminating tidbit, each whispered allegation, was like a dagger to his rapidly crumbling reputation. But the true coup de grace came when a well-known industry journalist cornered Evan, her perfectly manicured talons poised to strike. "Care to comment on the rumors about your illegal business practices, Mr. Parker?" she purred, her voice dripping with venomous glee. Evan's face drained of color as the spotlight turned on him, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. In that moment, I could see the realization dawning in his eyes. The game was up, and he had been played like a fiddle. As the journalist's scathing exposé hit the newsstands the following day, the fallout was swift and merciless. Clients jumped ship, investors pulled their funding, and Evan found himself persona non grata in the very circles he had once dominated. Yet, even as I savored the sweet taste of his downfall, a part of me knew the true satisfaction would come from watching Tilda suffer the same fate. Her reputation already in tatters would be the final nail in the coffin, a public shaming that would leave her utterly and completely broken. As the plans for that grand finale took shape, a cold, calculating determination settled over me. They would pay for their sins, and by the time I was done, the mere mention of their names would be met with scorn and derision. Vengeance was no longer just a desire, it was an all-consuming obsession, and I wouldn't rest until they had been utterly and completely destroyed. As the fallout from Evan's exposed misdeeds rippled through the industry, Tilda found herself caught in the crosshairs of my relentless quest for vengeance. With her career already hanging by a thread, the final nail in the coffin came in the form of a scorching exposé that laid bare the sordid details of her affair with my former fiancé. The article, penned by a ruthless journalist I had strategically fed information to, painted Tilda as a homewrecker of the highest order, a duplicitous snake who had betrayed the sacred bonds of family for her own selfish desires. Her once promising design career was eviscerated, her reputation dragged through the mud for all to see. How could she do this to her own sister? The whispers echoed through industry circles, each utterance like a dagger to Tilda's already battered ego. As the backlash intensified, potential clients and collaborators scattered like cockroaches in the light, abandoning her in droves. Suddenly, the very name that had once commanded respect and admiration became a punchline, a cautionary tale of ambition gone awry. Through it all, Tilda remained oblivious to the architect of her downfall. Her frantic attempts to salvage her tarnished reputation met with stony silence or vague excuses. Each rejection, each slammed door was a victory in my eyes, a small repayment for the pain she had inflicted upon me. Yet, even as her world crumbled around her, I knew the true satisfaction would come from watching her face the consequences of her actions in a very public, very humiliating way. The stage was set at a high-profile industry gala where the who's who of the design world would gather to celebrate the year's achievements. It was the perfect opportunity to deliver the final, crushing blow to Tilda's already shattered ego. As the event drew near, I worked tirelessly behind the scenes, orchestrating a grand unveiling that would leave her exposed and vulnerable before her peers. Anonymous tip-offs to key attendees, careful manipulation of the guest list, no detail was too small in my quest for the ultimate comeuppance. When the night finally arrived, I slipped into the lavish ballroom like a phantom, my gaze immediately drawn to Tilda's nervous figure. She clutched a glass of champagne like a lifeline, her eyes darting around the room as if sensing the impending storm. The first strike came in the form of a whispered aside, a perfectly timed rumor that spread like wildfire through the crowd. Suddenly, every conversation seemed to revolve around Tilda's sordid affair, each retelling more salacious than the last. As the whispers grew louder, more insistent, I could see the realization dawning in Tilda's eyes. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped her glass, her face flushing with a mixture of anger and shame. But the true coup de grace came when the event's host took the stage, his face a mask of barely concealed disgust. "Before we begin tonight's festivities," he announced, his voice carrying through the suddenly hushed room, "I feel it's important to address the elephant in the room." With a dramatic flourish, he gestured towards Tilda, who shrank back as if struck. "It has come to our attention that one of our esteemed guests has not only engaged in unethical business practices, but has also betrayed the sacred bonds of family in the most despicable way imaginable." As the damning details of Tilda's affair were laid bare before the horrified crowd, I watched her crumple, her carefully constructed facade shattering like brittle glass. Tears streamed down her face as the jeers and whispers swirled around her, each utterance a knife twisting deeper into her wounded psyche. In that moment, as Tilda's world came crashing down around her, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. A hunger for vengeance finally sated. They had been broken, their reputations and dreams reduced to ashes, just as they had so callously decimated my own. As I slipped out into the night, a cold, calculating determination settled over me. The war was won, and the spoils of victory were mine to savor. Tilda and Evan had paid the ultimate price for their betrayal, and they would forever be branded as pariahs in the world they had once sought to conquer. Vengeance, it seemed, was a dish best served utterly and completely. The aftermath of Tilda and Evan's public disgrace was like a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. No corner of the industry was left untouched by the sordid tale of their betrayal, their very names becoming synonymous with deceit and moral bankruptcy. As the dust settled, I watched from the sidelines, savoring every delicious moment of their downfall. The once charming, successful pair had been reduced to pariahs, their reputations in tatters and their futures hanging in the balance. It was a sight to behold, made all the sweeter by the knowledge that I had been the architect of their demise. With each scathing article or whispered insult, I reveled in the knowledge that my thirst for vengeance had been quenched, their suffering a balm for the wounds they had so callously inflicted. Yet, even as the world turned against them, Tilda and Evan remained oblivious to the true mastermind behind their downfall. Their frantic attempts to salvage their reputations were met with stony silence or vague excuses, leaving them grasping at straws as the tide of public opinion turned decisively against them. It was a delicious irony, really. The very people they had once sought to impress were now the ones casting them out, their names mud in the circles they had once dominated. Each rejection, each slammed door, was a victory in my eyes, a small repayment for the pain they had caused. As the weeks turned to months, the fallout only intensified. Tilda's once promising design career crumbled to dust, her name becoming a punchline in the industry she had once sought to conquer. Potential clients and collaborators scattered like cockroaches in the light, abandoning her in droves. Evan fared no better, his real estate empire disintegrating under the weight of legal battles and financial ruin. Investors pulled their funding, clients jumped ship, and suddenly, the man who had once seemed so untouchable was reduced to a mere shadow of his former self. Through it all, I watched in silent satisfaction, relishing every moment of their suffering. It was a sweet, intoxicating revenge, a punishment befitting the magnitude of their betrayal. But the true coup de grace came in the form of a high-profile industry gala, where the who's who of the business world would gather to celebrate the year's achievements. It was the perfect opportunity to deliver the final, crushing blow to their already shattered egos. As the event drew near, I worked tirelessly behind the scenes, orchestrating a grand finale that would leave them exposed and vulnerable before their peers. Anonymous tip-offs, careful manipulation of the guest list, no detail was too small in my quest for the ultimate comeuppance. When the night finally arrived, I slipped into the lavish ballroom like a phantom, my gaze immediately drawn to Tilda and Evan's nervous figures. They clutched drinks like lifelines, their eyes darting around the room as if sensing the impending storm. The first strike came in the form of a whispered aside, a perfectly timed rumor that spread like wildfire through the crowd. Suddenly, every conversation seemed to revolve around their sordid affair, each retelling more salacious than the last. As the whispers grew louder, more insistent, I could see the realization dawning in their eyes. Their knuckles turned white as they gripped their glasses, their faces flushing with a mixture of anger and shame. But the true coup de grace came when the event's host took the stage, his face a mask of barely concealed disgust. "Before we begin tonight's festivities," he announced, his voice carrying through the suddenly hushed room, "I feel it's important to address the elephant in the room." With a dramatic flourish, he gestured towards Tilda and Evan, who shrank back as if struck. As the damning details of their affair were laid bare before the horrified crowd, I watched them crumple, their carefully constructed facades shattering like brittle glass. Tears streamed down their faces as the jeers and whispers swirled around them, each utterance a knife twisting deeper into their wounded psyches. In that moment, as their worlds came crashing down around them, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, a hunger for vengeance finally sated. They had been broken, their reputations and dreams reduced to ashes, just as they had so callously decimated my own. As I slipped out into the night, a cold, calculating determination settled over me. The war was won, and the spoils of victory were mine to savor. Tilda and Evan had paid the ultimate price for their betrayal, and they would forever be branded as pariahs in the world they had once sought to conquer. Vengeance, it seemed, was a dish best served utterly and completely. In the aftermath of Tilda and Evan's brutal downfall, a strange sense of emptiness settled over me. For months, my every waking thought had been consumed by the all-consuming fire of revenge, a hunger that had driven me to systematically dismantle every aspect of their lives. But now, as the dust settled and the ashes of their ruination lay scattered at my feet, I found myself adrift, unsure of what direction to turn. The thirst for vengeance that had once fueled my every move had been quenched, leaving a hollow void in its wake. It was Leah who finally jolted me from my malaise, her no-nonsense approach cutting through the fog of uncertainty like a knife. "Enough wallowing," she declared, fixing me with a steely gaze. "You've won, Macy. You took those snakes down and made them pay for what they did to you, but now it's time to move on and focus on rebuilding your life." Her words resonated deep within me, igniting a spark of determination that had long been smothered by the all-consuming pursuit of revenge. She was right. I had achieved what I had set out to do, and dwelling in the ashes of my victory would only serve to hold me back from the bright future that lay ahead. With Leah's unwavering support, I began to piece my life back together, one step at a time. The legal battles and asset divisions had left me with a comfortable financial cushion, allowing me to take some much-needed time to reassess my priorities and chart a new course. It was during this period of self-reflection that an unexpected opportunity presented itself in the form of a promotion at work. Anton, ever the shrewd strategist, had recognized my potential and was determined to reward my unwavering dedication to the company. "You're a force to be reckoned with, Macy," he declared, a hint of admiration in his eyes. "With your talent and drive, there's no limit to what you can achieve." As I stepped into my new role, a renewed sense of purpose flooded through me. This was a chance to start anew, to leave the painful memories of Tilda and Evan's betrayal in the past and forge a path towards personal and professional fulfillment. The road wasn't always easy, of course. There were moments when the ghosts of my past would rear their ugly heads, threatening to drag me back into the depths of bitterness and resentment. But with each obstacle I overcame, each challenge I conquered, I grew stronger, more resilient. And as the months turned to years, something remarkable began to happen. The wounds that had once seemed so raw and agonizing began to heal. The bitter ashes of vengeance that had fueled my every move faded, replaced by a newfound sense of peace and self-acceptance. It was during this period of growth and transformation that I found myself opening up to the possibility of new relationships, forging connections with people who saw me for who I truly was. A survivor, a fighter, a woman who had stared into the abyss of betrayal and emerged victorious. As I looked back on the long, tumultuous journey that had brought me to this point, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. The road had been fraught with pain and heartbreak, but I had emerged on the other side, a stronger, more resilient version of myself. And as I stood on the precipice of a new chapter, one filled with endless possibilities and the promise of a brighter future, I knew that the demons of my past had been well and truly exorcised. Tilda and Evan had tried to break me, but in the end, their betrayal had only served to temper my resolve and forge me into the woman I was always meant to be. Vengeance, it seemed, had been a mere stepping stone on the path to true self-discovery and empowerment. And as I looked ahead, the future had never seemed brighter.